Richard Vreeland, commonly known by his moniker Disasterpeace, is an LA-based artist who is well known for his work composing sound treatments for video games, animated pictures, and Hollywood films. He was the mastermind composer behind the much-beloved and highly publicized indie game Fez, released in 2012. In 2015, he crafted the soundtrack for the horror film It Follows, with only a 3-week time frame. In 2016, Disasterpeace once again created sonic magic with his music for Hyper Light Drifter. It seems that anything he touches turns to gold, as many of the projects he has worked on often have been highly acclaimed and received universal praise from aggregate review sites. Going through his Bandcamp page reveals an immense amount of work dating back well over the span of a decade. Simply put, Disasterpeace is a prolific and accomplished artist creating unique sounds, often revolving around the cult music subgenre of chiptunes, but not limited to. Despite his many successes within the chiptunes genre, Richard does not like to be nailed down to any particular genre or art form. Richard is a graphic designer, computer programmer, in addition to his musical talents, including piano, guitar, and other instruments. Richard continually challenges himself to grow and experiment both on his own and through his many collaborative projects. Richard's music is compelling and always brings me back well after the game is over. When I reached out to him about doing an interview, he replied yes, but suggested that I review his many past interviews and blog posts to make sure as not to retread old grounds. I spent a lot of time working on this interview and in doing so tried to shine a light on a new facet of Disasterpeace. While the interview may touch on familiar topics, my wish is that it will inspire his listeners and give ideas to artists of all art forms, looking for ways to carry their dreams from the mind into the real world. Hi, Rich. First, I want to thank you for joining me on this Friday the 13th. Really cool to be able to sit down and talk to you over the power of the internet. Been a big fan of your work for a few years now, and it's always a surreal moment whenever I'm able to interact with people whose work I admire.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me. Happy to chat.
Yeah, and if this sounds awkward, it's because I'm reading off a script. So hopefully you can bear with me. So I did record an intro for this interview giving people a summary of my impressions of who I think you are and what you do, but could you give a short description of yourself and how you define what you do, both in terms of music and other interests?
Sure. My name is Rich Freeland. I've been doing sound-related work for about 11 or 12 years under the name Disasterpeace. And I've done work on video games, films, cartoons, music for theater. I've created some of my own software for music. Just kind of played in and around the audio space.
That's very cool. I wasn't familiar that you've done theater work. Is that sort of a one-off project you worked on, or?
Yeah, it's oh geez, my mic levels are really hot. Hold on a second.
Okay.
I don't know why they're so. Oh, I just turned this down and it went back up again. Okay. I had a friend in San Francisco who put together a project called Mud Water, which was kind of combining a ballet and the street style of turfing.
Oh, yes. You know what? I actually did download that, and I've heard it. I just didn't look into the project it came from.
Yeah. So, what the hell's wrong with my mic? Hold on a second. It keeps changing the input level, and I don't know why.
Huh.
Wow, that's really strange. What the hell? Okay.
Well, I still have the backup over here. Okay.
Okay. So, So it was a cool project, and it's interesting to write music for something like that, having come from mostly writing to film and games. It's just kind of a different set of parameters to think about.
I'm just amazed at the amount of work on your Bandcamp alone. It's pretty extensive. So I've listened to a ton of your music, but actually haven't looked into all the projects it came from. I played Fez, of course. I just downloaded Mini Metro, and a list of others. I have the It Follows Blu-ray. So some of the stuff I've played in context, and other stuff, like I showed you my screenshot. I just have tons of your music, but haven't got around to all the projects. But I guess this is kind of an aside, but did you catch the Nintendo Switch presentation last night?
No. I mean, I had heard about the Switch, but I hadn't checked in yesterday. Why?
Yeah, I was up super late last night covering it on my blogs, and I don't know if you saw my spam tweets about it, but I'm pretty hyped and a little disheveled today from that whole ordeal. But are you a Nintendo fan?
Yeah. Yeah, I love Nintendo. I haven't, I had a Wii. That was the last Nintendo console that I had. But I've always played Nintendo games, and I've always been a big fan of, the music from the kind of the core titles. Big Koji Kondo fan.
Oh yeah, Koji Kondo, Ocarina of Time. Doesn't get much better. So I noticed that you have a web domain, disaster.pizza, that reroutes to your website, I believe. So if you had to pick
Yeah.
one food to eat the rest of your life, would it be pizza or tacos?
It'd probably be tacos, just because pizza is always going to be like bread and cheese. And I think if I was eating just bread
Yeah.
and cheese like all the time, I think I would get really lazy and lethargic and fat. So at least tacos, you can kind of mix it up and put different stuff in it.
So you're in
I mean,
LA now. They probably have some good tacos out in LA, right?
yeah, the tacos are pretty good here, for sure.
So I guess these are just kind of some icebreaker questions. Are there any YouTube channels or podcasts you like to listen to on a regular basis?
Yeah. Oh, man, my mic is driving me insane. It keeps changing volume.
Hmm.
Jeez, why is it doing that? Oh, automatically adjust microphone. Yeah, fuck that. There was a setting that automatically adjusts the mic level.
I
That's why it was doing that. Okay, so yeah, so I listen to a lot of podcasts. Um, One of my faves is 99% Invisible, which is a cool one. They kind of dive into different things that are um, around that you may not normally think about or notice. So they do a lot of podcasts about things like technology, or what went
Okay.
into like they did one about the like city planning of Salt Lake City, or they do one about like the NBC like logo sound, or
Huh.
um, I mean it's kind of all over the map, but it's generally just about these like um,
Kind of fringe
sorts
technology.
of sorts of things that we take for granted, and then kind of just diving deeper into um, the stories behind them.
Okay. That's very cool. Yeah, it reminds me of some of the NPR podcasts I've listened to, and I have a huge backlog of podcasts, and I'm kind of obsessed with podcasts, YouTube, and video games to a very unhealthy point. But I think my favorite podcast is one called the Duncan Trussell Family Hour. Have you ever heard of that?
That sounds familiar, but I haven't
He,
listened to it.
he's been on the Joe Rogan show before, and he sort of talks about a lot of weird spirituality stuff, like technology, comedy. It's a very strange blend, but
I didn't
yeah.
catch that.
So
What did you say about it? Sorry.
it's just like a very strange blend of spirituality, comedy, and technology. He has a lot of cool guests on there, so I'm not sure if you're interested in that sort of thing, but it's probably my favorite podcast.
Cool. That sounds interesting.
Yeah. So, anyways, I wanted to get into your name meaning. I'm kind of going out on a limb here, so bear with me. I understand that the name Disasterpeace was a spin-off of the word masterpiece, and the name sort of implies this dualistic union of two polar opposites, which brings to mind the spectrum of styles your music covers. So in terms of themes and thinking of like emotions, your music seems to run the gamut from these darker, sort of sad, or I don't know, I wouldn't say angry, but kind of darker pieces to bright and happier movements. So when I first played Fez a few years back, I was kind of blown away by how the audio fit the game so well, and a lot of these indie games like Fez and Hyperlight Drifter do a great job merging these retro ideas with new technology. And there's this alchemical motto, it's solve et coagula, which basically means to dissolve and coagulate. So in simple terms, it's like a process of breaking something down into parts and then building it back up into something new and novel. So many times this idea is expressed in stories of artists going through this proverbial dark night of the soul and emerging at the other end with a new vision for life. And I can't help but associate these sort of ideas with the name Disasterpeace. At least that's my projection onto it. And it could be totally far out there, but my question is there any deeper meaning to the name Disasterpeace which you either intended or have adopted over time? Or is there any interesting fan interpretations besides mine?
Well, I really I wasn't familiar with that phrase, but the meaning of it is really cool, and it's kind of an approach that I've taken at times. You know, this idea of kind of taking things that inspire me and deconstructing them and building them back up as something else. I think it's kind of essential to do that. It's very easy to, it's very easy to do something overly derivative by, taking something that you like and just trying to copy it or replicate it. And I think it's really important to not do that. Try really hard to kind of like dwell on it and then forget it and try to channel, your feelings about it. But the Disasterpeace name is actually something that I came up with when I was a teenager, probably like 18 or 19, and saw myself maybe being in a band or something. And I just wanted a cool. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to have a cool name. It didn't get much more complicated than that, really. And I feel lucky that I settled for a name. Being pretty young, I settled for a name that I still like. I don't think is stupid, because most of the things
it's kind of like a tattoo
at that age. Yeah, like most of the things I did at that age have not really necessarily stuck with me. But that name has,
your earlier music, I don't know, was your earlier music like metal or prog rock? I don't know what the genre was, but are you still interested in that sort of genre, or is that something you've moved away from?
I mean, it's always going to be a fabric of my influence, and it's definitely, those are definitely spaces that I occupied and explored for many years. A lot of a lot of inspiration from prog rock, especially early on in my career. Like the first, I don't know. I have like 5 or 6 or 7 albums that are very prog heavy kind of things. So it'll always be something that I can access. It'll be a part of my toolkit basically. But as I've gotten older, I've kind of mellowed out a little bit, and I don't necessarily go for the heavy kind of athletic stuff all the time, but it's still an option.
Right. Because back with this Disasterpeace name, I look at your early roots, and that music you were making was very technical. And the music you're making now is more technical, but it's more spacious and minimalistic almost in a way. So I feel like that kind of the roots really tie together the story when the old music was heavier and the newer stuff, not to pigeonhole your current work into a certain style, but a lot of the big stuff from like Fez and Hyperlight Drifter, there's these very spacious, ethereal works that have a technical knowledge but are less, they're kind of like more spread out and spacious. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think in general that's been kind of a trend for me over time. Just kind of moving away from the overly technical stuff and trying to do more with less, basically. And I think there's
Right.
also a very clear sort of trajectory that I've had, which is when I was starting. My production skills were really bad, and I had a lot of musical ideas, and so I kind of focused on just writing music and composition. And over
Right.
time, I think for the first thing that I really focused on was composition, and then I kind of I allowed my production chops to kind of build over time. Um, and then when I got really comfortable with production, I was able to kind of rely more on production, and I didn't have to throw a million notes at the page all the time.
Right. I gotcha. So I guess I want to kind of go into a territory that you've probably already answered questions from in past interviews, but it's an area that I'm fascinated in, and it's kind of about your journey from the start into kind of finding your path and where you're at right now. And I want to read a quote from this. You know who Terence McKenna is or was?
That name sounds familiar.
He was basically kind of a philosopher. He dealt with a lot of psychedelic types of work, but he had just a great way with words, and I want to read this quote and then get into the next question here. So it goes like this. Nature loves courage. You make the commitment, and nature will respond to that commitment by removing impossible obstacles. Dream the impossible dream, and the world will not grind you under. It will lift you up. This is the trick. This is what all these teachers and philosophers who really counted, who really touched the alchemical gold, this is what they understood. This is the shamanic dance in the waterfall. This is how magic is done, by hurling yourself into the abyss and discovering it's a feather bed. So I kind of wanted to use that quote to frame the following questions, and I'm interested in hearing about your journey. If I understand correctly, you originally studied graphic design and music production, but your advisor suggested majoring in something else, so you pursued synthesis. And I know your graphic art interest spawned from your mother's work as a graphic designer, and I know your father was a musician who played in a Beatles cover band called the Blue Meanies. But I'd like to know about the process that led you personally to make a decision to pursue art as a career path, because a lot of people like myself would love to make art or on the verge of trying to make art as a living, but it's kind of a risky field, at least in the public's point of view, compared to a typical 9 to 5. And a lot of people who find this
Yeah.
success in this field have this sort of point where they jump in with both feet. So is there what was the path of making this decision like for you, and was it something you felt comfortable jumping into coming from your background, or was it something you felt was a risk?
I guess I felt like as a young person, I didn't really have anything to lose. When you're at that age, when you're 18, 19, 20, you have most of your life ahead of you, and I think for me, I very much always valued, being able to do the thing that I love, and I didn't want to get caught down in doing something that maybe was adjacent to what I loved. That was very much the specific
Right.
thing that would kind of fulfill me. And I was really keen on trying to kind of find this like find this point, this like intersection between doing art and being able to make a living. And
Right.
initially I had thought that I would do graphic design, and I was pretty good at it. And I saw myself working for a firm or something like that. But the more that a couple things happened, I was kind of in. I had ended up in a major that was adjacent to graphic design. It was more print focused, and that had a lot to do with my lack
Okay.
of a freehand drawing ability. And so I didn't think I could get into a Bachelor of Arts program, so it was a Bachelor of Science. Um, and the core curriculum was great. It was all design and arts stuff, but then it started to move into business of printing and mass production kind of stuff, and I was like, this is not really what I want to do.
Hmm.
And I wasn't able to I wanted to switch to the Bachelor of Arts program, and there was like a 2-year waiting list, and that didn't seem good. And the more I freelanced too, the more I did graphic design work for as a freelancer, the more I felt like that relationship tended to be very subservient. There's there's certainly a craft to it and an art to it, but it's a lot of just doing what people tell you to do.
Right.
Even if you're specifically hired to do something, you kind of succumb to people's very like neurotic and particular desires, and for some reason, everybody thinks that they know best when it comes to visual stuff. And my experience with sound has often been the opposite, where people have no idea, and it's more esoteric, I think, because people are less.
Yes.
On a daily basis, people are not as they're not as closely tied to their ears, because biologically we don't use our ears for survival as much as we use our eyes, and so I think that's part of why it's been a lot more satisfying for me to be a sound person, even when I'm doing commissions and things like that.
That's a very interesting perspective. I never thought about sound in terms of a survival mechanism, but it definitely makes sense. I worked with a graphic designer recently, and I had a picture in my head of what I wanted, and I could describe that to this person, but what they actually put out ended up being a little different than what I was envisioning. So I just eventually settled for it, but I've never gone to someone looking for sound creation. So I noticed your website it seems like very well designed, all the little symbols you have at the top, like the brain and the trumpet. And did you design your website?
I did. Yeah, that's I used to do a lot more freelance work and doing design work, and web development was kind of my primary thing that I did for many years. Since I was probably 13, I was doing web development.
Huh. I would definitely hire you if I was in the market for that. I would definitely hire you based off your website. It's very well done.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, I didn't like do those icons, but I picked the icons, and I did all the back end stuff. Built the blog, built the whole kit and caboodle. So it's kind of become like a fun side project for me, because there's design, and then there's I'm doing a fair bit of programming and markup, and it's just kind of I enjoy it. I enjoy working on my website.
That's cool that you have that variety in your skill set. But back to the question here, I was wanting to know, when you were first starting out, kind of taking this more seriously, was there ever like a real struggle to find work, or did your experience and education give you an upper hand in finding projects? And also, was there a particular turning point that made you feel successful in terms of your own personal aspirations?
Yeah. So, in the beginning, I kind of stumbled into it. I was just writing music for fun, and I had been frequenting this message board that was for this hobby that I spent a lot of time doing it when I was a teenager, called e-wrestling.
Yes, I read about
someone
that.
had posted. Okay.
On your blog.
Yeah. I had I would post music there periodically towards the end of my e-wrestling career and the beginning of my music career. I would post music to these message boards, and at one point there was a gentleman who posted a wanted ad for music for a cell phone game, and I applied to do that, and got the part, and so I was probably 19 or 20, and I started doing some music for these cell phone games pre smartphone. So it was all
right.
I was all like MIDI files and stuff.
But didn't that game turn into vaporware? The first game.
Some of them were, some of them turned into vaporware. One of them came out and didn't have any music in it. They never used the music for whatever reason. And so I
Huh.
ended up releasing that later as like a original album called Limeade Grin.
Huh. Limeade Grin?
Yeah,
Huh. So
Limeade
they
Grin.
didn't put that game out, but you still got paid for it, and that was kind of the point when you were seeing the money come in that you were like, okay, maybe I can do this as a career.
Pretty much. I mean, even though the experience was, I mean, there wasn't a lot of creative direction. I kind of got to do what I wanted, and I got paid for the music. And even though they didn't really use the music, it was still kind of an eye-opening experience that I could do. I could be a freelancer in the way that I was a freelancer for graphic design. I could do that for sound, and it
Yeah,
seemed feasible. I just needed to find, I just needed to meet the right people and continue to do it, and you know, get better at it.
that's really cool. I mean, just getting paid to do something small, even for me doing blog posts, and sometimes I'll do photo edits for people, and making money doing something that I'm really interested in is such a fulfilling thing that I think a lot of people would have happier lives, even if they weren't making as much as as they would in their typical 9 to 5 job. And that's no secret, but I always like to see people pursuing the things they like doing. So this is kind of an off-topic, random, weird question, but back in 2012, around the time Fez came out, I saw a video of you performing live with a guitar. And you had a bit of an afro and black rimmed glasses, and with you being a musician and all, I was thinking of this character from this TV show called Flight of the Conchords. So I'd like to know, are you familiar with the show? And also, do you believe in the idea of fate with your meeting? Sorry, blah 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 blah. Let me rephrase this. First of all,
Okay.
do you know Flight of the Conchords, and do you like the show?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I used to get that a lot actually because I had those glasses and the big hair. I used to get compared to Jerome a lot.
Jermaine,
Jermaine, yeah,
Jermaine, yeah.
Jerome,
So
Jermaine, yes.
the other thing I was interested in is I heard that at that show or one of the performances you were at, I don't think it was that particular one, but one of the performance, one time you were performing live and you met the programmer, I believe, for Fez, and he liked your music, and he came up to you, and that's how you got the job. So I wanted to know, do you believe in fate, or was that moment, is it more just a coincidence that turned out for the best?
um, I think there was
Like,
something fateful about it. I know that it wasn't just a chance meeting. They had been trying to figure out who they should get to do the music, and I was on their radar. But I think they were thinking of doing a compilation approach, like having a bunch of different musicians contribute to the soundtrack. And after I played and met Renaud, the programmer, we talked about it a bit, and I was kind of saying that I think the soundtrack will be better if you work with a single person, so that you can kind of have more of a singular experience and more of an auteuristic sound that kind of goes with kind of the auteuristic vision of the game. It's very much Phil's game, and everything kind of funnels through him, except for the
right.
music. To be honest, because Phil did give me a little bit of direction, but he was pretty hands off, and I think we just kind of had a. I just happened to be in the wheelhouse for him. Like I was just making stuff, and he
Yeah.
liked what I was doing, so it was a very copacetic relationship.
Yeah, well, it was an incredible match. I cannot imagine it being a better fit. And I feel the same way about what I've seen with Hyperlight Drifters so far in regards to the soundtrack as well as the whole art style. I know recently you turned down an opportunity to work on Stranger Things, which of course is a huge success, and you pursued It Follows instead. So it's interesting that both of these darker projects with darker themes came to you at the same time. And I know you weren't a big fan of horror before you worked on It Follows. But do you want to work on this kind of project in the future, or is there any other areas you'd like to branch out in terms of music or programming or anything like that?
Sure. I mean, the one thing I will say is that It Follows came out before Stranger Things, probably maybe 2 years before. And
Oh,
Stranger
really?
Things, yeah. So I was actually pitched Stranger Things because of my work on It Follows, and
Ah, I
so
gotcha.
there was a very explicit like feeling of we kind of want you to do what you did for It Follows for us, and
Right, yeah.
ultimately I think that's what they ended up getting. Uh, and so I mean there were a number of reasons why I decided not to do it, but that was certainly one of the reasons. Um, and but I think going forward, I would be open to doing another horror film, but I like to do I like to put myself in a new situation every time. And
Right.
so, there'd have to be something new about it. It would have to be very different. Like for instance, like one opportunity that came across my lap recently was for a horror film that was more comedic. It's kind of campy,
Oh,
and that would be a case where I might consider doing something like that. Where it's oh it's horror, but it's ridiculous. It's I don't know. Like it would bring out. I feel like that would bring out a new
yeah.
element in
A
my
new
work, and
sort of
I'm always trying to
aesthetic.
yeah, I'm always trying to like see if I can find things to work on that will kind of push me in new directions that I may not be super familiar with or comfortable with.
Okay. So, speaking of branching out, have you ever considered getting into like full orchestral scores? I know you might have done a little bit of work in the past, but have you ever thought about getting into the sort of John Williams arena as far as making a full-blown or orchestral arrangements goes?
I mean, it's certainly been on the radar for me, like as a thing I haven't done yet. I'm actually working on a feature right now with the director of It Follows, David Robert Mitchell, and we'll be doing some orchestral stuff for
Oh,
that
wow.
for that film.
And that's completely unrelated to It Follows, or is it similar?
It's unrelated.
Okay. I'll have to keep my eye out for that. So, I can't tell you how much of your blogs and interviews I went through. There's so many I missed, and I know I've retreaded a lot of old questions. But based on your social media posts, you appear to be a bit of an audiophile, and that might be an understatement, but you have this impressive programming knowledge, which is a unique skill set for a musician to have. And you created this generative music program called January, where you make music by catching snowflakes with the character's tongue. I also noticed you share a lot about obscure music tools, including a machine that uses 2,000 marbles to make music, and this other very peculiar device called the Electro Lush, I believe. And on January, it says January, you tweeted, "If I'm touching my MacBook Pro and it's plugged in, when my friend brushes my arm, it generates a 60 hertz tone." So, could you explain what the Electro Lush is for listeners and kind of what the
Yeah,
fascination with these obscure instruments is?
sure, for sure. I mean, what I would say first, just as a clarification, is that an audiophile is someone who is kind of obsessive about the sound quality, like fidelity of sound. And I think
Okay.
in that particular, yeah, I think in that particular area, I'm actually not an audiophile because I don't. I think at a certain threshold, I stop caring for the
I'm
most part
sorry.
about
I
about
didn't mean it
fidelity.
as a
But
label as much as
no, no, no,
you
no,
have
no, no, no. I
a
just
very
wanted.
big interest in all these weird
Yeah,
music
I mean,
types.
oh, absolutely. I just wanted to
Okay,
for posterity. I just wanted to
I
clear that up.
gotcha.
But yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely have a really strong interest in audio and technology and where those two kind of intersect. Um, the Electro Slutch, I think it's called, is it's a handheld microphone that captures electromagnetics waves, I guess. So you can put it near electronic devices, and it kind of picks up the electromagnetics of that device, and so you get all these like crazy digital sounds. Sounds like a really like crazy old video game console or something, because it's all very digital,
Yes.
stepwise
It's,
sorts of sounds.
it's very alien sounding.
For sure.
Um,
It's just cool. It's cool that they make something like that. You can just kind of point it at a thing, and it's like, whoa, what is this like weird sound that I can't hear, but it's there. That whole sort of
yeah, it's kind of
the
like
whole
when your
idea of
cell
like
phone goes
there,
off.
yeah, like the whole idea that there's audio that's lurking that you can't that's without it's outside of the spectrum that you can hear. I think is really interesting.
Right, it's like invisible. So, is there anything that's any like cool objects you've scanned with that, and do you have any plans to use that kind of tool or any kind of bizarre instruments in future projects?
I mean, I'm always looking for cool sounds. I just kind of went around and kind of captured the sound of all my appliances and stuff, and so I have some recordings of that, and I haven't. I've used it a little bit actually. I used it in this this short video I scored and did sound for. It's on my website. It's for a conference that happened last year called Style Frames,
Huh.
and there's it's this beautifully animated piece by Iran Haleli,
Oh,
and
I
there's
saw
this.
that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, there's
It's
this one scene where there's some kind of like snake monster or something that like flies past the stream, and the sound of that monster I used a piece of the electromagnetic sound from maybe my iPhone or something weird.
Huh. I just saw that yesterday, I think, and I followed his Tumblr. His work is really impressive, but I'll have to go back and watch it again to see if I can hear it.
I mean, I did a lot of stuff to it to make it a little bit more organic, because it's a very kind of a harsh sound, but it's yeah, it's there.
Huh. So, this is kind of moving into another topic, but on your Bandcamp video for subscribers, you mentioned one of your recent life goals, so to speak, is to look for excuses to get away from the computer as much as you can. So, outside of the computer and making music, what are things you enjoy doing in your spare time? I know you recently moved to LA, so are there any cool spots out there you've been checking out, or any kind of hobbies and interests outside of the digital realm that kind of take up your free time?
Yeah, I think some of that stuff has been on hold for me since I moved. I've been just trying to kind of reacquaint myself with life here, and being in LA, there's just more distractions, for better or worse. But when I was living in the Bay Area before I moved here, I was playing ice hockey quite a bit,
Oh,
and doing a fair bit of hiking and doing yoga on occasion and riding my bike a lot, and
oh,
just
really?
trying to do other stuff to stay active and to kind of you know what's the word I'm looking for, like decompress basically.
Right.
um, and I mean, right now, my things in my life are changing a little bit. I just moved in with my girlfriend, and she has a
Oh, wow!
dog, and
Congratulations.
thanks. So I mean,
Lots of changes going
there's
on for you.
I like to, yeah, changes, and I just like to get away when I can. And since I moved here, I made a conscious choice to like have a separate workspace that I commute to,
Yes, yes, that's a great
and
idea.
yeah, and also a space that is kind of attached to a community. So I have a workspace that where I can be alone there. I can isolate myself, but I can also kind of hang out and mingle, which is nice.
Ah,
And it also it means that when I come home, I'm not necessarily thinking about work, which is, I think, been beneficial to
Yes.
me.
I do a lot of editing in my bedroom, but I just got another room in the house where I've started sleeping because my tendency with running this YouTube channel would be, okay, I'm gonna go to bed, and then I keep getting comments on videos and people, and I get up and I check it, and I'm always thinking about it. But for some reason, when I remove myself and go into another room in the house, I'm able to relax and I'm not near my phone or my computer, and it's just in this increasingly uh, technological digital age, having outlets and escapes from these things is is underrated. But that got me into another question here for you. Do you prefer working by yourself or with other people? Because I know you've done a lot of solo projects and a lot of collaborations, but is there one of them that you prefer over the other in
I
terms of
think as I
music?
get older, yeah, I think as I get older, well, so with music, it's tricky because uh, if you're gonna have a true collaboration on music, it can be very time consuming. Um, but as I've gotten older, I've dedicated more and more time to collaborating in other ways. Bringing people in to help me in different facets, and
Oh,
I've done some projects where I did a project called Rains that has done incredibly well on the App Store for
oh,
iOS. It's sold over 1 million copies. Um, and
wow.
that game, I brought in my friend Mateo to do the music. Originally, I was going to do it, and then I decided that I could I could kind of bring him in to kind of fulfill some of the ideas that I had for the music as far as the system and the way things work, and then I would focus more on direction. I was kind of the audio director for that project. I kind of just stayed on top of Mateo and my friend Eric, who did the sound design, and also I helped the programmer Francois build some of the audio tools, some of the audio pipeline stuff. So I designed like a procedural like gibberish dialogue generator kind of thing. We came up with a concept for how to create all these different voices for different characters that were diverse, and then also have a way to play back these. Basically, what we did is we recorded a bunch of gibberish, and then we like chopped it up into syllables, and use a system that like predictably, but it's random sounding, but it's predictable in the sense that when someone says a certain phrase, it would sound that way every time you hear it. But there's like
Right.
hundreds and hundreds of different. There's a lot of dialogue in the game, and
So it's
I
like
don't
the
know. It
sound
was
of
just fun to try
language, but it's
something
not
different,
actually language.
basically.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it was fun to do something a little bit different, and collaboration I think has pushed me to do different. It's just another way to kind of have a different experience with a project, and it's helped me, to continue to learn about this stuff, and it also is nice to give friends work. That's a nice feeling. So.
Right. Definitely. It's very cool. So I have like two questions here that are kind of longer paragraphs that I want to kind of give some context for. This is kind of on the topic of the past, but people tend to look to the past with rose-tinted glasses. If you look back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, especially with video games, everything is just glorified to hell. Like mainstream media perpetuating the myth of an idealistic world where everybody parties on Friday nights, everybody has a soulmate, every story has a happy ending. It's like an artificial reality that's nice to escape to. And most people know it's fake, but it appeals to real emotions, and so it leaves this sort of emotional imprint, as if our dreams are better than our reality. So in retrospect, it's easy to see how this pop culture and these icons create sort of generational stereotypes, and they kind of actually shape how time and history are really remembered, even though they're part of a fantasy world. So now with the internet, it's like a time machine catalog for all of recorded history and pop culture. So maybe the nostalgia we have today won't be treasured as fondly in the future since everything is just a click away. I know this is really out there, so I'm sorry. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this obsession people seem to have with the past, because a lot of your work seems to
Yeah.
skirt the line between the past and the present. So I'm interested to hear what you kind of think about this indie nostalgia obsession. Is it something that you want to see more of? Is there too much of it? Is it a passing
Yeah.
fad?
Well, first I want to say that I think going forward, it's you said that the internet is kind of like it's like a capsule that kind of captures everything, and maybe going forward, people won't be as nostalgic about the past. But I think we still have a tendency to forget, things that transpired, even a year ago, or like they start to become kind of foggy, and people start to get nostalgic about it even now, because
Yeah,
it's even though it's I guess technically available, it's out of the way. So I think nostalgia, I think that will continue. I think there's probably, I think nostalgia's probably been with, it's just always probably been with people in some level. And I don't think there's
right.
anything inherently wrong with nostalgia, but I think it's a little overblown and overly magnified. Um, I think it can be an excuse. It can be a really kind of shallow excuse to do something or make something, because it's kind of like it borders on the Pavlovian, as like, oh, give the people the cookie that they want. Like, we'll
Right.
just we'll take all these things that are really you know popular in pop culture, and we'll kind of just stew something up with it. And I think when nostalgia, there's a perceived nostalgia from something, I think that's totally fine, and it's a legitimate emotion. It's great. But I think there's been a tendency to lead with nostalgia as like, what is the core foundation of what we're doing? It's, oh, it's about nostalgia. It's about capturing this vibe from, the 80s or
Yeah.
whatever. And I just think that that's kind of lazy, and it doesn't make for interesting content, in my opinion.
Right.
Um, so for me, I think for me it's been a journey, kind of like learning, what my relationship to that stuff is, because I think for sure, the place that I started was, I got into doing music through video games, and through my love for video games, and for going back and hearing the music of those games, that I hadn't listened to in years, because from the, I guess, it was the music of my youth, and then revisiting it as like an 18, 19, 20 year old, I had really strong emotions to it, and really strong emotions attached to it. And so
Yeah.
in a certain way, nostalgia kind of pushed me into doing music for like doing chiptune music, doing retro video game style music, and got me involved. But over time, I always wanted to do. I didn't just want to, like, oh, I want to make, like, a new version of Mega Man or something. I just wanted to do, like, I wanted to do new stuff. I wanted to do something new and fun. But not
Right.
be afraid to kind of, not be afraid to be influenced by things.
Yeah, and
But
I don't
yeah,
I don't have a problem with the nostalgia either. I like that they're bringing these old ideas back and recontextualizing them with modern technology and adding to them. I don't think graphics are the most important part of a game, but people often think in terms of generations like 8-bit, 16-bit, and then the music is a whole nother ball game. So I feel like the things you did with Fez and Hyperlight Drifter is like it borrows from this past, but there's so many more layers and channels and so much more depth to it that it's almost a completely different monster. But the reason for my question was back in October, you had a tweet where you said, I feel like the 80s vibe so many folks go for is largely based on a shallow fever dream, longing for a decade that never actually existed. So I was wondering, kind of what were the thoughts behind tweeting that, and maybe I took it out of context.
No, I mean, I think this pretty much hits the nail on the head because I think for me, especially around the time of Stranger Things and stuff, I just started to notice more like how much people have this tendency to lead with nostalgia in their
Right.
in creation, but also in their relationship to things. And I just think that in the case of a lot of the stuff that's quote unquote 80s, I mean it's this like hyper glossified version of the 80s that didn't, it's like
Yes, like vaporwave.
it's like it's a new thing, which is the irony of it is that it's a totally new thing. It's like it's totally based in I don't think it's based in reality. It's like kind of this like overly glorified version of the 80s, and it's not how the 80s actually were, and it's not how the 80s
Yes.
actually sounded like.
Exactly.
But somehow over the year, like over the last like 10 years or something, people have just continued to iterate on these ideas and be inspired by other people who are making like 80s inspired music or whatever. And so
Right.
now it's like it's like its own thing. It's like the 80s of a parallel universe. Like it's not, it's something completely different, which is
Yeah,
fascinating.
exactly. And that kind of goes
It's
back to what
weird.
I was saying about people looking at the past with rose-colored glasses or rose-tinted glasses. It sort of leads into my next question too. Throughout history, it seems a lot of great art allows a space for people to project their own emotions and realities and meanings onto, regardless if it was the artist's intention or not. You look at people like Kurt Cobain, and he's often remembered for the drugs he took, his ripped jeans, his blonde hair, and Courtney Love, rather than the message behind his music. And you look at like Kurt's lyrics, they were cryptic and open to misinterpretation. So to this day, people are arguing and trying to decipher the intended message of the songs he wrote, because a lot of great artists become thin-sliced and their message becomes an urban legend, which echoes through history like an elementary game of telephone. I think a lot of times people like to simplify things to make a sort of consensus reality in a complex and messy world. I noticed on your blog you expressed frustration over being pigeonholed as a chiptune artist, and that part of this, and you go on to say you think the frustration comes from this human desire to feel connected, combined with that consensus reality about what your work means to a mass audience that you didn't actually intend it to have. But to bury the pigeonhole, so to speak, my first question is, how would you like to be understood both as Richard Vreeland and as Disasterpeace? Is there any difference between how you would personally like to be understood, and is it any different from your work? And for the record, do you have
Yeah.
any message or impression that you would want to leave behind someday? Sorry, that's a lot of stuff.
Well, that's kind of. I mean, I guess that's what's tricky about it is that I've taken strides to try to distance myself from myself personally from Disasterpeace, and to kind of think of Disasterpeace as like a separate entity, and that I'm not the material that I create. Like
Right.
it's its own standalone thing, and yet because it's responsible for most of my creative outlet, the work that I do. I have a hard time, not taking things personally sometimes. I think there's a part of me that doesn't want to, rely on my work as a crutch. But then another part of me that realizes that, it's because of my music that I've, done a lot of things in my life that I wouldn't have had access to otherwise.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a tricky thing. It's a tricky thing.
Yeah, I kind of, like I was saying, it's like people get thin sliced because it makes it easier to understand in this kind of like endlessly complex world. So basically, I see all these different talents you have, and not just music. You have the graphic design, the programming, and all these other things. Even the writing on your website seem very good. Not to, butter you up too much, but I guess, do you just want to be thought of more as an artist, or I don't? Is there a better message that you'd like to give your fans? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just, I mean, in some respects, that article was just a way for me to vent a little bit because I get frustrated sometimes that, everybody that interfaces with the work that you do has a different, naturally has a different connection to it and a different relationship to it. And so some people coming in, they've only heard one thing I've ever done, and so, their impression of that one thing is how they classify me. And
Right.
I mean that's I mean I don't think that there's nothing I can say or do I think that would change the way that people treat me in that respect. And so I kind of had to go through a process of coming to terms with being misunderstood on a certain level. And
Right.
um, yeah, I mean it just is what it is. I mean
Sort of like the artist's
I just got to
curse
keep doing
almost.
what. Yeah, I mean, I like to be considered. I like to be thought of as an artist, and as someone who, who's exploring, who's not consigned to, oh, just doing this one thing for my entire career. And I think that's a really common issue that artists face. Um,
Yeah.
and ultimately, I just, you just gotta do what you do.
Yeah, I think they got to update your Wikipedia article for starters because it says known for his work as a chiptune artist. Come on, Wikipedia. Don't you know anything else?
Yeah.
But I know we're going over the time I originally mentioned to you. So do you want to keep going, or if you want to end it here, that's fine. I do have a lot of other questions we could go over. I'm happy to do it either way, but I don't want to keep you any longer if you don't want to.
Yeah, I'll keep going. I'll just try to be I'll try to be concise.
Okay, yeah. Feel free to cut me off at any point if you feel the urge to split. So, from your
Okay. Got
online
it.
persona and all of your interviews, including right now, you seem like a really calm and collected person. I know earlier you mentioned you do yoga and sometimes you start your day with meditation. Is there any specific meditation you practice, and does that have any role in getting you into a creative mind state?
I kind of went through a phase of doing meditation, and I was doing guided meditations on different things, like meditations on focus or stress
Yeah.
or love, or I would do meditation at night sometimes for sleep, just different things like that. Um,
Okay.
I did that for probably 2 years. Um, I haven't been meditating probably for the last year and a half or so.
Okay. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to get into this, I guess, a philosophical or spiritual angle to the art, if there is any. And I noticed that you were raised in a family that went to church, and you wrote the music of my early youth was varied but influenced by a religious upbringing. I really liked the Christian band DC Talk, the music from the Peanuts, and so on. Uh, so I also was raised in a family that went to church, and we always had Christian music playing. Back in high school, I discovered Christian hardcore, like metal music. I was into these bands like Under Oath and Norma Jean, and there's these pop punk bands
Sure.
like Reliant K. So are there any other Christian bands that you used to listen to back in the day? And also, were you into Linkin Park? Because I saw you liked new metal at a point.
So other Christian bands, I used to listen to the Newsboys and
Yeah,
Audio Adrenaline
yeah,
was a big one. Um, yeah, I would say those two and DC Talk. Those are probably the primary ones for me. And then I did listen to Linkin Park for sure. I remember when that record came out. I kind of just found it in the record in the music store. Like I didn't even know what it was. It just looked cool, and I bought it, and I was like, oh, this is really cool.
yeah. I
uh,
heard I heard that one song from them that was like, it starts with one thing. I don't know what. You know that song? And I used to play it in my room and dance to it. My brothers would come in and make fun of me because I liked rap music. And this, I guess they just thought it was only for a certain color people that, I didn't see it that way though. But I guess that's sort of a goofy question, but do you consider yourself a religious person in any way, or do you have any personal beliefs about the origin of the universe and the possibility of an afterlife?
I think about it from time to time, for sure. Um, I think I think at times I feel like I have a spiritual capacity, but um, I guess I don't dedicate a lot of time to it,
Right.
I would say.
Yeah, that's kind of what's going on with me too. I have this sort of passing interest in spirituality, and I was raised in a Christian household, but I don't continue that tradition in my age. But I was curious about the spirituality because I was looking through a lot of your song titles and just things you'd tweeted, a lot of esoteric sounding titles. So I'm kind of putting on the tinfoil hat here. But you had a track titled Fashionable Alchemy. There's a song titled Soul of the Traveler, Every Time We Dream, Morning Star, Panacea, Cult of the Zealous, and that goes on for a long time. And then just a lot of the descriptions and things you wrote. You had a tweet about esoteric spreadsheets, the esoteric symbols on your Bandcamp page. I could just go on and on here. The Waker description ending says, "Come explore the world of dreams. Will you awaken your dreamer or leave her to drift forever?" So what kind of thought goes into naming these songs? Is it kind of arbitrary, or is there any sort of superstitious, or is it just kind of random? Because I saw you also liked fantasy books like The Hobbit, so maybe that's more the origin.
Yeah. I mean, it's very little of what I do is random. Like the song title stuff is like the stuff that you're talking about, like Every Time We Dream and that description. I mean, those are things taken directly from that game, the game Waker.
Right.
And in general, song titles, I'll put a lot of thought into song titles. There on numerous projects I've actually used a spreadsheet to figure out what I wanted to name things, and I would kind of go through all the dialogue or all the sort of nomenclature that we would use in development to kind of figure out what is the appropriate name for this song that kind of captures how I feel about it and what the narrative goals are of this music, etc. So I mean that's sort of the the backstory behind a lot of those song titles. I try really hard to make the song titles have some sort of narrative meaning. And if it's for a game soundtrack and you haven't dove deep into that game, you may not get the title, but that's okay.
Well, I saw a video where you broke down the song titles, or the songs for Fez and what they meant in the context of the game and what you were going for. And I felt like it really matched perfectly. A lot of the songs I like the most that you do have this sort of mystical appeal to them, like Panacea from Hyper Light Drifter, and there's just this feeling. It's almost the feeling I get is like an esoteric. It almost takes me to like this secret place, and I don't know how to describe it, but it's a sort of intangible, sort of magical feeling I get from listening to your music. So that's why I kind of wanted to go into that. And I just have a couple more questions here.
Thank you.
So how do you get into a creative mindset? Do you depend on motivation to get into that, or do you value things like persistence more when facing new challenges? Is there any sort of tips you have for artists out there who are looking to create and trying to find how they can get into that?
Yeah. I think that's a really appropriate sort of way of thinking about it. I kind of see those two ideas. Kind of the being inspired, motivated, and persistence. I kind of see those as like a scale, like a sliding scale,
Okay.
because I think I tend to try to lead with inspiration, like being like I want to be inspired and motivated to work on things, and that's kind of what I default to. But certainly on projects, especially getting to the end when things are tough, it doesn't always pan out that way, and there's always a lot of there are a lot of situations where you just have to hunker down and get it done and be persistent and
Yeah.
kind of push through any sort of negative emotions that might be present. So I think both of those things are those are modalities you're going to have to deal with when you're being an artist. I think it's making art is a certain kind of journey, and there are a lot of experiences that are kind of innately tied to making art, and sometimes things are really easy and smooth. Like Fez was really easy for me; it was really smooth,
Oh.
and then Hyperlight Drifter was like merciless, like brutal at times, like really really hard. So
Yeah.
and I think you're a different person too. I mean, Fez is like at that point I hadn't really done any big games, and so it's kind of like I can do whatever I want, and it'll be new, and I'll be happy with it. But
Right.
on Hyperlight Drifter, it's like, well, I've done all these things, and I really want to make sure that I'm doing something that's different and new, and that it's appropriate for this. And
Right.
I don't want to just like settle for, oh, it's like a Fez track, or you know what I mean. So
Right. That seems
the
like
more
a persistent theme is challenging yourself to do new things with your music.
yeah, the more that you do, the harder it gets to do new things, because we're limited in our capacity. So it continues to get harder, and so it requires, for me, it requires that I be stronger, and so I have to build up myself in other ways to kind of be able to continue to try to do new stuff all the time.
Yeah.
It would be a lot easier to just kind of settle for, I'm gonna do more Fez
Definitely.
stuff, or I'm gonna do more like prog chip stuff. Like I could totally do that, and maybe one day I will. But for now, I'm more interested in continuing to try to push myself into new places.
Yeah, a lot of times I hear people say the final 5% is harder than the first 95%. Just the way you finish a project is so important to how it actually turns out. Sometimes those little changes at the last moment can really shape the whole project in a different way.
Absolutely,
So
yeah.
I got two more here. I know we're going a long time, but personally, I'm a bit of a night owl. I feel a lot more creative at night. So this morning I was really struggling, even right now, to get through these questions, just trying to get them out. And I know setting limitations for how you create has been a recurring pattern throughout your work that affords you a new sort of experimental freedom. So I was curious, do you feel that you're more or less creative at different times of the day or year? And do you intentionally choose to create at different times because of that?
I don't think I would say that I fall into a pattern. There are times when I'm really creative in the middle of the night. There are times when I'm really creative in the morning, afternoon. It really, it depends. And I think I kind of see people as like these ever changing things. Like I know that for me, I feel kind of different every day. Like a slightly different person, and in a different emotional state. So
Right.
I try to when I have that impulse, I try to honor it, and to be impulsive. And it's not always the healthiest thing to do. Like getting up in the middle of the night to play the piano or something. But
Right.
I want to honor the idea. That the idea that's stirring, I want to get it out. So I try
Right.
to be true to that as much as I can.
Yeah, a lot of
And that's
times.
what's nice about being a freelancer.
Go ahead.
No, I was sorry. I was just saying that's what's nice about kind of being a freelancer, and having the kind of the freedom to
Right.
set your own schedule and
Choose
just
your
kind of
own
be
hours.
flexible.
Now, a lot of times I get the best ideas like in the middle of the night. I lay down and I get in this sort of state between being fully awake and being asleep. There's this sort of weird mercurial state between there where I get into this relaxed mind state where I come up with all these ideas, and sometimes I'll write them down, but if I don't actually act on them, I wake up like the next day and I'm like, what was I thinking? What was I, drunk or something? But it's interesting to hear about. I don't know. I thought it would be interesting just to look at different limitations, because I know you talk about using limitations a lot in your work. But more to the point, on the bonus features for It Follows, there was a conversation with you about making the music, and at the end of the segment you said, my favorite scene to score from the film was the big final scene at the pool. I've always prided myself on trying to work on projects that I think are meaningful and that align to my own values. Fortunately, we made that happen. So, just as a kind of an end note, what are the values you look for when considering taking on a new project?
Yeah. That's funny because that featurette was totally edited together, and like I think some of the things I said are probably taken out of context, but it's certainly true. It's certainly true that I try to work on work on things that push me in a new direction. What did I say?
I've always prided myself on trying to work on projects that I think are meaningful and align with my own values. So I was just asking what
Okay.
values you consider when contemplating what projects to take on with your limited time.
I think I just want to be attached to things that are either putting out a positive message, or aren't things that are not going to waste people's time, basically. I think that's what it boils down to. It doesn't need to be
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be preachy or teaching some kind of lesson or something. It just needs to be something that I think has value and is worthwhile. It could be something that's like fun, and light, or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've done things like kids games and stuff. That's a good
Case-to-case
example of
basis.
something that I'm almost always. Yeah, it's case to case. But I just want to, I want to feel like the things that I'm doing are contributing to society, and so that's kind of how I think about it, I guess.
Awesome. Well, Rich, I know we went over the time, but I definitely want to thank you for joining me on today, Friday the 13th. Hopefully we're going to live through it. This is my first interview, so for you and for the listeners, I apologize for any shakiness, but Rich, you did a great job. It was great to have you on. I'll be putting links to your website and social media accounts in the description for the video. Can't wait to see what you come out with next.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been great.
Awesome. All right, man. Well, I think I barely made it through that. I was having a lot of anxiety, but it was awesome.
Hey, it was. You did really great, and I really appreciate all the research and time that you put into it, because you asked some really great questions, and I thought it was really thoughtful. So
I'm glad you.